There's no cure for this.
No.
It eventually kills you. In parts of southern Sudan, sleeping sickness caused by a parasite called trypanosoma that's transmitted by the bite of local flies kills more people than AIDS. This is also the world epicenter of onchocerciasis, a worm that grows more than 1.5 feet long inside the body and spreads thousands of eggs to all the organs, soon to become worms. Over the decade or so it takes to kill its human host. Sometimes the smaller worms work their way to the cornea, causing the vision damage that gives this illness its common name, river blindness. There's also visceral leishmaniasis, tuberculosis, leprosy, yellow fever, dengue fever, various bacteria, and mycoplasmas that can cause severe deadly forms of pneumonia. I actually contracted one and came home very sick. And many other people in the village that we were visiting were infected with malaria, and this part of the world is a particularly virulent form, P-fel Pickperium, which is pretty much untreatable. So we flew in there strapped into this cargo plane because we were flying in with a couple of tons of food. When we got to Machar is a little town up in the northern western edge of South Sudan, 15 miles from the Darfur border. And it was a town, historically, it had been a town of about 7,000 people. But it was, when we got there, 45,000 people, because all these refugees were fleeing from Darfur, from the genocide that was going on in Darfur. And this was, one of these absolute confluences of all these things. That, by the way, this town, Machar, we were 400 miles from the nearest paved road or the nearest electricity. At night, the sky was absolutely extraordinary. You could see the Milky Way. But there was nothing. I mean, we had to pack in batteries to do the radio show by satellite phone. And the only way in that was by air. And even that only during the dry season. And these 45,000 people had one well. The average daytime temperature was 120 degrees. It's desert, basically, with large trees punctuating an empty desert, and large trees, mahoganies actually. They send 30, 40-foot roots down to where the water is during the dry season. And what we're seeing there is that the desert has been moving south. And as the desert is moving south, this is sub-Saharan Africa, this is a region that 100 years ago was actually very lush and verdant, and is now desert. And as the desert is moving south, the people are moving south. And as the people are moving south, you're getting cultural collisions, you're getting political collisions, you're getting resource collisions. So we were seeing climate change, global atmospheric deterioration, up close and low. At the same time, in South Sudan, they discovered oil, and the Chinese are in there aggressively buying it. And in the deal that they've got with Mr. Bashir, who is the president of North Sudan gets the money from the Chinese, and then he distributes half of it to South Sudan, even though the oil is coming out of South Sudan, but he has never given an accounting of how much oil has been pulled out. And so the South Sudanese are a little upset about this, as you can well imagine. And oddly, every time they discover oil in South Sudan, Bashir moves the border another 100 miles south to incorporate that oil field, so he doesn't even have to split the revenue 50-50. And this is very much part of the genesis of the Darfur conflict. And so we're seeing here this collapse of economy and democracy, or the lack of democracy in politics. And, of course, population. The essential point that I got, and I talk about this in the book, a long conversation I had with a young man at Dinka. Dinka is the local tribe that traditionally populated this region. And he knew some of the old Dinka language, and he knew some of the names. And he knew that his grandparents knew how to cure most diseases with the local plants. How to grow things, how to store things, how to make it through the dry season, how to make it through the wet season, how governance worked, that life was actually reasonably good 3, 4, 5 generations back. This was a part of Africa that largely was not colonized, frankly, because it was just so remote. what we had done, we meaning Western civilization, Western culture, what we had done to the Dinka people and to the Darfuris and to the northern Sudanese as well, and to all the people in this region, is we had given them, they had developed a culture that was perfectly adapted to their environment. And we had given them a culture that was perfectly adapted to city living, without any cities. And so now the only way that they could function was to wait for the plane to fly into the food. And then they were criticized for being basically unwelcome. Right? They had the right-wing bunch in the world going, we should, what do you get when you feed 1,000 starving refugees, 5,000 starving refugees, all these kind of awful things. So, we're seeing this at the breakdown of this, the dysfunction associated with it. So, what this raised for me in my mind was the question, is it possible to have culture that works? I mean, is it possible to have a functional culture, something that actually, where people are self-governing, where things are functional? We did our show, literally in Darfur, from the worst place on earth, and so Louise and Sean and I decided, okay, let's try also doing our show from the best place on earth. And at that time, Denmark had just been selected as by a fairly comprehensive national studies 60 Minutes did a special on it as being the happiest country in the world. And they had actually, in Denmark, they had one of the longest lifespans, the best outcomes for all diseases, the lowest mortality rate, the lowest level of drug addiction, the lowest level of homicides, the lowest levels of teen pregnancies and sexually transmitted diseases, the lowest levels of alcoholism and drug addiction, on and on. You go through all these qualities of life indicators. There's one outlier in all of this. This is just a kind of an anecdotal thing that nobody can quite explain. And that is that the countries that have the lowest homicide rates in the world have the highest suicide rates in the world. Now, it's not like suicide is a huge problem. I mean, their suicide rates are, instead of being 0.0001%, it's like 0.0002%. But that's still, it's like there's something going on that nobody can explain. But in any case, and these are things just the northern climates, but there are countries in southern climates that are egalitarian that have the same situation, Costa Rica, for example. But other than that one odd thing, what we saw in Denmark was that in a country where there was very high taxes on great wealth and a very strong social safety net on the bottom, underneath, where becoming unemployed didn't mean that you were devastated, that you would always have access to health care, because from cradle to grave, there were good elderly care facilities. So, basically everything was taken care of in life. Not taken care of, but you understand. I mean, there weren't, living wasn't a crisis. And there was a very, very high level of civic participation in democracy. Very, very high level of active participation. They had these windmills in Copenhagen and Harvard that are producing 19% of the electricity of the country right now. Not just in the ones in Harvard, those are the most prominent. There's a bunch of them. And we interviewed on the show, as you remember, it's been a year now. Some of you may have not heard it. We had on one of the members of Parliament who was most responsible for this program that's probably rolling out sometime this year, maybe early next year, because he said it was going to take about 2 years for it to get into production. But the big question they had was, okay, we're producing 18%, 19% of our electricity by windmills, but at night, we're not using that electricity. So, we use it intensely during the day, but not at night. And so how can we figure out how to store this? Now, in Norway, they actually have, a lot of electricity being generated by dams, and they're pumping water back up in some places at night with the excess electricity. Dam